Beginning in the late 1950s, the U.S. Navy was looking for an interceptor to defend carrier battle groups against the threat of air-to-surface missiles fired from Soviet bombers and submarines. The mission was called Fleet Air Defense, and the Navy wanted an airplane that had a more powerful radar and longer-range missiles than the F-4 Phantom II. Studies of the Fleet Air Defense concept led to the Douglas F-6D Missileer, but this was a pretty big airplane and it appeared to have little ability to defend itself once it fired its Eagle missiles, which were made by Bendix. The Eagle actually had a range of 160 miles, which is impressive, but that project was canceled in December of 1961. One component was salvaged for use on follow-on designs, and that was the engine, the Pratt & Whitney TF-30. The Navy turned to Hughes, that had been developing the AIM-47 Falcon missile for use with the Air Force XF-108 Rapier that was also canceled about the same time as the Missileer. Hughes actually offered the Navy a newer version of the Falcon called the AIM-54 Phoenix and the associated AWG-9 radar system. So now the Navy had an engine, a missile, and a radar to accomplish the Fleet Air Defense mission. All it needed was an airplane to host these components. So the U.S. Air Force and Navy are both seeking new airplanes because of the previous cancellations when Robert McNamara becomes Secretary of Defense. And on February 14, 1961, McNamara formally directs the services to study the development of a single aircraft that would satisfy both requirements. Early studies indicated the best option was to base the design on the Air Force requirement and use a modified version for the Navy. As we always see with joint programs, that demand creates some complications. So in June of 1961, Secretary McNamara orders the go-ahead of what they're calling TFX, which is Tactical Fighter Experimental Program, despite the Air Force and Navy efforts to keep the programs separate. So the Air Force and the Navy can only agree on three parts of this airplane. It needs to have swing wings, it needs to have 2 seats, and it needs to have 2 engines. The Air Force wants tandem seating for low-level penetration ground attack, while the Navy wants a shorter, high-altitude interceptor with side-by-side seating to allow the pilot and radar operator to share the radar display. Also, the Air Force wants the aircraft designed for a 7.33 G with Mach 2.5 speed at altitude and Mach 1.2 speed at low level. It needs to be about 70 feet long. The Navy has a less strenuous requirement of 6 Gs with Mach 2 speed at altitude and high subsonic speed, which is just about Mach 0.9 at low level, and it needs to be only 56 feet long. The Navy also wants the aircraft with the nose large enough for a 48-inch diameter radar dish, which is basically the width of the AWG-9 radar. So the TFX contract is awarded to General Dynamics, but because General Dynamics lacks experience with carrier-based airplanes, they partner with Grumman to make the navalized version of the F-111B. So right from the get-go, weight and performance issues are plaguing the F-111B with respect to carrier suitability. So with this program in distress, Grumman starts to study improvements and alternatives. Then in 1966, the Navy actually awards an official contract to Grumman to study alternatives. That results in the Grumman 303 airplane. Grumman continues to refine the design of the 303 into 1968 as Vice Admiral Tom Conley, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air Warfare, flies the developmental F-111 and discovers it has difficulty going supersonic and poor landing characteristics. So as a result of that, he testified before Congress about his concerns against the official U.S. Department of Navy position. And as a result of Conley's testimony, in May of 1968, Congress stops funding for the F-111B, and that allows the Navy to pursue an answer tailored more deliberately to its requirements and not having to deal with the Air Force as it develops its Fleet Air Defense airplane. So in July of 1968, the Naval Air Systems Command issues a request for proposals, also known as an RFP, for what they're calling the Naval Fighter Experimental VFX program. VFX called for a tandem 2-seat twin-engine air-to-air fighter with a maximum speed of Mach 2.2. And remember, the F-4 Phantom was infamously manufactured without a gun. So the VFX requirement included the need for an M61 Vulcan cannon built into the airplane. Bids for the VFX were received from General Dynamics, Grumman, Vought, McDonnell Douglas, and North American Rockwell. 4 of those bids incorporated swing wing technology. Grumman used its 303 design initially and named their entry Tomcat as a tribute to Admiral Tom Connolly, who put his career on the line to kill the F-111B program. And also naming the VFX Tomcat was in keeping with the Grumman line of cats: Hellcat, Wildcat, Bearcat, Panther, Cougar, etc. They also considered Alley Cat, which was rejected because of sexual connotations, and Sea Cat, but that sounded a little weak, kind of like a seaplane sort of a name. Somewhere along the way, the 303 went from a single vertical stabilizer to a twin-tail design, and the look of the classic Tomcat was born. Grumman received the contract award in January of 1969. After more than 10 years, the U.S. Navy finally had the fleet air defense platform it needed to counter the Soviet Union's air threat against the carrier battle group. So as we said before, whatever airplane was awarded the contract for VFX, it was going to be built around three components. And those were the TF-30, the AWG-9, and the Phoenix missiles. So that's what Grumman started with. Although it was lighter than the F-111B, and the F-111B's weight was one of the showstoppers with respect to carrier suitability, the Tomcat was still the largest and heaviest U.S. fighter to fly from an aircraft carrier, a consequence of the requirement to carry the AWG-9 radar and the Phoenix missiles. It also had an internal fuel load of 16.2 thousand pounds. So to save time and avoid cancellation by the new Nixon administration, the Navy skipped the prototype phase and jumped directly into full-scale development. The Air Force did the same thing with the F-15, by the way. First F-14 flew on 21 December 1970, just 22 months after Grumman was awarded the contract. The second flight, by the way, had a total hydraulic failure on final approach. The crew safely ejected. The Tomcat reached IOC, which is Initial Operational Capability, in 1973. So that is a very fast program. As a side note, the U.S. Marine Corps was initially interested in the F-14 as an F-4 Phantom replacement, and they went so far as to send some of their aviators to VF-124 to train as instructors. But ultimately, the Marines pulled out because the Tomcat was not pursuing a ground attack role for the F-14. So let's back up a second. At this time, there were two major schools of thought, with those charged with designing, testing, and fielding military aircraft. The first school believed that the airplane should be designed with capability as the primary factor, even if that meant the defense budget would support buying fewer of them. The second school believed that airplanes should be designed to be built in the largest possible numbers that the budget would support, with lesser but adequate capability to save money. So it's with those two camps in mind that we introduce the Navy's VFAX program, and VFAX stands for Naval Fighter Attack Experimental Program. This program is designed to replace the A-4 Skyhawk, the A-7 Corsair II, and the remaining F-4 Phantoms. It's also designed to complement the F-14. So in August of 1973, it looks like the build more, less capable airplane camp is winning out, as Congress tells the Navy they need to pursue a lower-cost alternative to the F-14. So that summer, the Secretary of Defense, James Schlesinger, orders the Navy to evaluate the competitors in the Air Force's lightweight fighter program, which turned out to be the General Dynamics YF-16 and Northrop's YF-17. On the 2nd of May in 1975, the Navy announces it's selected the YF-17, which is basically the loser in the Air Force's lightweight fighter program because the Air Force decided to go with the F-16. But since the lightweight fighter did not share the design requirements of the VFAX, the Navy asked McDonnell Douglas and Northrop to develop a new aircraft from the design and principles of the YF-17. On March 1st, 1977, Secretary of the Navy W. Graham Claytor announces that the F-18 would be named Hornet. So the Navy immediately redesignates the Hornet from the F-18 to the F-A-18, which, oh, by the way, violated the OPNAV instruction for how airplanes were supposed to be designated, but the Navy didn't care. In fact, they were trying to make a point about the versatility of this new airplane that they were fielding. So along with having its desired fleet air defense capability in the form of the F-14 Tomcat, the Navy was now also fielding an improved attack capability with an airplane that could go supersonic, unlike the A-6, and could also double as a fighter, which is something the A-6 couldn't do. But as a fighter, the Hornet lacked speed, range, and endurance. In fact, a book called The Pentagon Paradox was written by Jim Stevenson, and it documents all the ways McDonnell Douglas and the Navy Program Office fudged the numbers or otherwise blurred the truth to get the Hornet fielded. And once introduced to carrier air wings, the Hornet instantly became the limiting factor to how cyclic operations were conducted. 1 + 45 cycles turned into 1 + 30 cycles, and when that proved to be too much in the face of the reduction in organic tanking capability, 1 + 00 cycles were added to the beginning and the end of every flyday, which put an additional burden on those working the flight deck. Basically, the Hornet had the same burn rate as the Tomcat, but it started with 6,000 pounds less gas. So the Hornet was designed to perform both the fighter and attack roles, but it couldn't perform fleet air defense as well as the Tomcat because it lacked the range and the endurance of the F-14, and it couldn't carry as much ordnance as the A-6. These deficits proved to be something the Navy tried to ignore, but ultimately couldn't as events unfolded. So when I showed up to VF-101, the Grim Reapers, the F-14 training squadron, to begin my Rio training in 1983, all of the U.S. Navy's F-4 squadrons had transitioned to F-14s except two. Those were the two squadrons based out in the Western Pacific aboard the USS Midway. They still had F-4s, but everybody else was flying the F-14A with the Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engine. So a few months later, while I'm still in the RAG, the F-14 training squadron, a guy from the F-14 program office, the class desk officer, comes down and gives us a lecture about what's going to happen with the community. And he tells us that by the time we finish our first sea duty, which was about 1987, that everybody would be flying F-14Ds. And that was amazing news. So we were going to go from the F-14A to the F-14D in about 3.5 years. The F-14D was a huge improvement over the F-14A in that the Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engines, prone to compressor stalls as is well documented, were replaced with General Electric F-110 GE400 engines. The D also included newer digital avionics, a glass cockpit, replaced the AWG-9 with the newer APG-71 radar, a different ejection seat, the NACI seat that didn't have an upper handle, and it had infrared search and track. But in 1989, the Tomcat community saw the first signs of the beginning of the end when Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney refused to approve the purchase of any more F-14D model aircraft that were priced at $50 million each, and he pushed for a $25 million modernization program of the F-14 fleet instead. So Congress decides not to totally shut down production of the F-14D, and they fund 55 Super Tomcats as part of a compromise. So the way that played out is 37 Ds were built from scratch at Grumman, and 18 F-14As were converted into D models, and those are designated F-14D parentheses Rs. Now, the $25 million modernization program that Secretary Cheney was insisting on turned out to be the F-14A Plus program. So with the A Plus, like the D, the TF-30 was replaced with the GE F-110 GE400 engine, a great engine. The F-14A Plus also received different raw gear. The ALR 45/50 was replaced with the ALR 67 radar homing and warning system. Many of the avionics components, as well as the AWG-9 radar, were retained. As I've documented in another episode, the F-14A Plus was redesignated the F-14B in about May, June of 1991. A total of 38 Bs were manufactured from scratch, and 48 F-14As were upgraded into B variants. So on a personal note with respect to models of the F-14, after my first tour in VF-32, where I flew the F-14A from 1984 to 1987, I was lucky enough to fly nothing but Bs for the rest of my time in the F-14. So at the same time, the early 90s, when Dick Cheney is Secretary of Defense, he complained that the F-14 was 1960s technology. And despite an appeal from the Secretary of the Navy for at least 132 F-14Ds and some aggressive proposals from Grumman for a replacement, Cheney wanted to replace the F-14 with a fighter that was not manufactured by Grumman. So whether Cheney had a financial interest in McDonnell Douglas, as some rumored, or was put off by Grumman's arrogance, which admittedly grew during the years John Lehman was Secretary of the Navy. Even when he was Secretary of the Navy, John Lehman was an A-6 bombardier navigator in the reserves. He was a huge fan of Grumman, went so far as to create an all-Grumman air wing to show other defense contractors that he didn't need them. The lawmakers who represented Bethpage, Long Island, had also fallen out of favor with the President George H.W. Bush administration. So whatever the reason, Secretary Cheney demonstrated great disdain for Grumman. According to Cheney, the F-14 was a jobs program, and to that point, when the F-14 was canceled, an estimated 80,000 jobs of Grumman employees, subcontractors, or support personnel were affected. And then things got worse for naval aviation. The A-12 Avenger II was being developed by McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics as a next-generation replacement for the A-6 Intruder. The Navy initially wanted to buy 620 A-12s. The Marines were going to buy 238. The jet was a flying wing design in the shape of an isosceles triangle with the cockpit situated near the apex of the triangle. The A-12 gained the nickname Flying Dorito. It was designed to carry precision-guided munitions internally, up to 2 AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missiles, 2 AGM-88 HARM air-to-ground missiles, a complement of air-to-ground ordnance, including unguided or precision-guided bombs, which could be carried in an internal weapons bay. But beginning in early 1990, McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics revealed delays and projected cost increases. Due to complications with the composite materials, aircraft weight increased 30% over specifications. This was bad news for an airplane that had to operate off an aircraft carrier. Also, because of the complexity of the radar system, there were technical difficulties during development and test. All in all, by one estimate, the A-12 program was consuming up to 70% of the Navy's annual budget for aircraft. A GAO report released in November of 1990 documented serious problems with the A-12's program. And a month after that report came out, Secretary of Defense Cheney told the Navy they needed to justify the program and deliver reasons why it should not be canceled. The Navy's response, as well as that of the contractors, failed to persuade him, and he canceled the program on the 7th of January for breach of contract. So all of this leaves a gaping hole in the Navy's carrier airwing composition plan in the early 90s. And because there was a general sense that the end of the Cold War should yield a peace dividend in terms of defense spending, the U.S. Navy considered updating an existing design more attractive than a new start. In light of this, defense contractors started pitching logical growth designs with the hopes that they made an almost entirely new airplane look like an existing type, while also giving them a familiar evolutionary designation. Congress would see the product as a low-risk, low-cost upgrade of a proven product, and thus move forward with procurement. So as McDonnell Douglas licked their wounds and tried to figure out how to keep the company solvent, as an alternative to the A-12, they proposed the Super Hornet. They initially called it the Hornet II. So in accordance with what they believed to be the rules at this time, McDonnell Douglas claims that the Super Hornet is simply an update to an existing design. However, the Super Hornet is largely a new aircraft, at about 20% bigger, 7,000 pounds heavier empty, and 15,000 pounds heavier at maximum weight. Super Hornet carries 33% more internal fuel, which was supposed to increase mission range by 41% and endurance by 50% over the legacy Hornet. The empty weight of the Super Hornet is about 11,000 pounds less than the F-14, which it is now supposed to replace, while approaching but not matching the F-14's payload and range. So as a side note that becomes a big deal later with respect to service life of each one of the airplanes, the Super Hornet is designed to carry a buddy store, a tanking pod. That's something the regular Hornet didn't do. And as the carrier air-wing multiple punted on organic tanking, the Super Hornet was used quite a bit in the aerial refueling role, and that consumed a lot of the airplane's service life as the years went on. So as McDonnell Douglas is pitching the Super Hornet, Grumman proposes the Quick Strike Tomcat. Quick Strike meant to be an upgrade for existing F-14s by giving them the Air Force's Lantern system and a ground attack version of the F-14D's APG-71 radar. It also is designed to carry standoff weapons like SLAM and HARM. Quick Strike was aimed at more cheaply picking up the Intruder's slack than at replacing the A-12's high-end capability. However, as this design was socialized, it was seen as an insufficient technological leap over the F-14B and D models already in service. Further, Quick Strike didn't solve the Tomcat's inherent analog-to-digital architecture limitations or the legacy framework burdens of maintainability and sustainability, meaning the F-14's cost per flight hour and maintenance man-hours were prohibitive in the emerging budget environment. So remember the Tomcat walk-around episode where I pointed out how much effort it took for maintenance personnel to open panels on the nose of the F-14, for instance. So Grumman goes back to the drawing board, realizing that quick strike isn't evolutionary enough, that the powers that be will not greenlight an airplane that's just an incremental improvement on the existing airplanes. So they come back with Super Tomcat-21. So let's go to the training aids. Let's pretend that Gypsy 214 is actually a Super Tomcat. First thing we got, new engines. The Super Tomcat has the GE F-110 429 engine. It's 29,000 pounds of thrust each. This airplane would have been able to supercruise, which means you can go supersonic in basic engine. That's a great feature for a fighter to have in terms of range and endurance. Second thing, got rid of the glove vanes and recontoured the shoulder so that it would accommodate 2,200 pounds in each wing of additional fuel. Again, increasing range and endurance. They put the Night Owl FLIR targeting pod under the fuselage instead of having to use one of the weapon stations. Single-piece windscreen for improved visibility. Wide-angle raster scan HUD capable of displaying FLIR imagery. Huge improvement over the existing HUD. Glass cockpit, new mission computers, and graphics processors. Onboard oxygen generation system, OBOGs. Now, of course, OBOGs had its own problems going forward, but let's just say not having to use LOX bottles is a leap in technology. APG-71 radar with upgrades ported over from the APG-70, which was the F-15E Strike Eagles radar. Digital flight control systems, which solved the high angle of attack flat spin problem, as well as some of the other controllability issues around the boat. Turn the Phoenix rails, because now the AIM-54 is a dry missile that doesn't need liquid cooling, into wet wing pylons capable of carrying 300 gallons each. Max trap was increased by 7,000 pounds. Always a good thing. Because of larger segmented Fowler flaps, Super Tomcat-21 had reduced approach speed and better low-speed handling characteristics. The airplane integrated the latest standoff weapons as well as the AIM-120 AMRAAM. And it had better survivability, particularly in the form of the ALE-47 countermeasures dispenser. But Grumman was caught in a catch-22 of sorts. The first idea, the quick strike, wasn't evolutionary enough. And the evolutionary idea, the Super Tomcat-21, was too expensive. So Congress decided to go with the Super Hornet. And with that decision, the Navy was forced to accept reduced capability in terms of speed, range, endurance in the name of pure digital architecture that would allow the airplane to incorporate improvements easier during its service life, better maintainability, and cheaper cost. But even though the Quick Strike and Super Tomcat-21 were rejected in favor of the Super Hornet option, naval aviation still had to find an interim solution to plug the gap between the retirement of the A-6 and the Super Hornet entering service. So the first thing they did was they unlocked the Tomcat's resident bombing capability. Pilots got smart on air-to-ground HUD symbology and dumb bomb delivery techniques. For instance, 45-degree dives, 30-degree dives. Rios learned what the switches and rotary knobs on the AUG-15 panel were for after years of ignoring that panel. But the Tomcat was a 10 mil dumb bomber compared to the Hornet's 1 mil accuracy as a dumb bomber. And that meant it wasn't the right platform for targets where the potential for collateral damage was unacceptable. For instance, when the USS Theodore Roosevelt was in the Adriatic with CAG-8 aboard in 1995, they begged the ATO riders to let them do a bombing mission. So those ATO schedulers finally relented, and VF-41 did a mission over Bosnia, and they wound up slinging a string of 4 bombs well past the target. Fortunately, this was the face of a mountain that was uninhabited, but those results kept the Tomcat off the ATO from that point forward. I was in the air wing that relieved the Theodore Roosevelt, and we didn't even get to try doing dumb bombing missions while we were there. We did a lot of TARPs, reconnaissance missions over Bosnia, and we also did some buddy bombing with our Hornets in the air wing, which made us kind of an extension of their wing. We'd dial in the laser codes, they'd tell us to pickle, and then they would laze the bomb to its target. So the airplane was not a precision-guided strike weapon yet. But because of what we weren't able to do in Bosnia, the Tomcat community started to develop, let's call it a poor man's quick strike. So this was a relatively inexpensive and rapid upgrade using the low-altitude navigation and targeting infrared for night lantern targeting pod. Now, Lantern is traditionally a two-pod system, but the Tomcat only used the targeting pod, which is the AAQ-14, with a steerable FLIR and a laser target designator. The targeting pod was mounted on Station 8, which is the right-wing glove pylon. The Lantern pod did not require changes to the F-14's software, but that pod was designed to operate on a 1553 bus airplane, which the Tomcat was not. So Martin Marietta developed an interface card for Lantern. The Rio would get pod imagery on a bigger TID, and this was, you took the round tactical information display, and now you had a flat 10-inch programmable tactical information display, a very cool multifunctional display in the rear cockpit. And the Rio would steer the precision-guided bombs using a hand control unit installed on the right side of the cockpit. So this Lantern mod was a stroke of genius. It happened on the late great Snort Snodgrass's watch when he was fighter wing with the assistance of Lieutenant Larry Slade. And I've spoken about Larry Slade in another episode. Larry was in the back seat of Slate 46 when they were shot down during Desert Storm, and he became a POW for the balance of the war, but went on to do great things in the Tomcat community, most notably this Lantern system integration. So Lantern changed everything, and just in time, because post 9/11, the Navy very much needed a deep strike asset because now it didn't have the A6. And the Tomcat filled that role, going into northern Afghanistan in a way that no other airplane in the air wing could. So by the time the final F-14 deployment happened in 2006, the airplane was more lethal than ever. Over its roughly 35 years of dominating the skies, the Tomcat proved to be one of the most capable, flexible aircraft in the history of military aviation. Started as a pure fighter that could take out airborne threats over 500 miles away from the carrier, morphed into a high-endurance, long-range, precision-guided strike fighter. And along the way, the F-14 excelled at a host of other missions, as varied as reconnaissance and forward air controller airborne. So the Tomcat's inherent flexibility and versatility begs the question, what if the Pentagon's decision that they made in '92 had gone the other way? How would the Super Tomcat have performed during the crises that the nation has faced in the 21st century, and where would the airplane be today? First, let's say the way forward solved the legacy Tomcat's limitations like those associated with maintenance man-hours, sustainment, cost per flight hour. Things like access panels and black boxes were brought into the digital age along with basics like aircraft's wiring and hydraulics. This new digital state-of-the-art architecture allowed the Super Tomcat to keep up with the incremental improvements in weapons system and radar technology as they presented themselves and as the budget supported year after year. The Tomcat's survivability limitations were mitigated, if not eliminated altogether, with reshaped leading edges and intakes and the application of radar-absorbent coatings that were also resilient enough to endure after months on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier at sea. And the last remnants of a steam gauge cockpit were replaced with a fully glass one that could be totally reconfigured as weapon systems improved over the years. Second, the way forward leveraged the legacy Tomcat's inherent advantages, particularly those around speed, range, and endurance. Those advantages relieved the organic tanking burden to a large degree and gave the Joint Task Force on-station capability that allowed for more persistent presence when and where it was required. And let's just agree that it's empirical truth that having two guys in the airplane instead of one is a huge advantage. Also, the Tomcat's available real estate allowed for mods that increased endurance even more, as well as increasing weapons payloads and ranges. And also, swing wing remains an aerodynamic advantage. So the bottom line, Super Tomcat 21 Plus would be more survivable. Fully tanked up, Super Tomcat 21 could go very far and protect itself in and out of the target area. Super Tomcat 21 Plus is more than just a fighter. Its digital electronic warfare system allows it to be a force multiplier in terms of intel fusion, something they like to attribute to the Joint Strike Fighter these days. And speaking of Joint Strike Fighter, the irony is we didn't field the Super Tomcat because of budgetary concern, and instead we fielded a $1.2 trillion airplane that, while a next-generation airplane, can't go as fast or as far or carry as much as the Super Tomcat would have been able to. Bottom line, you could say we spent more to get less. And if you added sixth-generation functionality like Loyal Wingman, where the Rio/Wizzo controls drone swarms, say that 10 times fast, you'd already have your next-generation air dominance capability. But of course, this didn't happen because that's not how defense acquisition works. and that's the topic for another day. Also, while it's inarguable that we've dumbed down some of the metrics associated with carrier-based strike warfare since the Cold War, the Super Hornet is a very capable airplane that has been modified in the intervening years to keep up with the threat. In fact, the Navy likes the Super Hornet so much that we're buying 78 more of them to fill the gap between the fact that we used service life of the Super Hornet too quickly because of tanking and it's taking us too long to field the F-35. But again, I like to think of how clean the plan would have been had we made the decision in 1992 to field the Super Tomcat-21. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Please ring the bell and subscribe, like and comment, support the channel using Super Thanks or become a patron at patreon.com/WardCarroll. Check the links below for merch and where to get the Punks trilogy, my first 3 novels about life in a Tomcat squadron, just republished by the Naval Institute Press. When you check out, use the discount code PUNKYT for 25% off. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.